By now you should know that CSS offers many possibilities for creating interesting animations. But to make your animations more complex and exciting, you need to have good control over the timing. That's why you need to know how to work with keyframes. In this video, you will learn how to do a basic keyframe animation in CSS. Previously, you learned how to animate a bouncing ball using the HTML canvas element and JavaScript. This time, you'll learn how to create the same animation using CSS. I opened Visual Studio Code and created my basic HTML structure in a file named index.html. In the head element, I added a link element to reference a CSS file named styles.css. First, I'll add the HTML element that will be animated. In this case, the element will represent the bouncing ball. So I add a div element to the body element and set its ID attribute to ball. Now I open styles.css. First, I add the keyframes definition. I'll name this animation bounce. Next, I add the from keyword with open and close curly brackets to define the starting state of the animation. The starting position should be the default position of the element. So I add the transform property and set its value to translate 3D with the coordinates 0, 0, 0. These three values are the coordinates along the x, y, and z axis in 3D space. Next, I add the to keyword with open and close curly brackets to define the ending state of the animation. The ending position should be 640 pixels right of the starting position. To do this, I add the transform property and set its value to transform 3D with the coordinates 640 pixels 0, 0. This means that the element is translated by 640 pixels on the x-axis and 0 pixels on the y and z axis. Finally, I add a CSS rule for the ball. I use the ID selector to select the ball element. First, I need to add a set of properties to make the element render as a ball. To do this, I set the width and height properties to 80 pixels. Then I set the border radius to 50%. This will round the corners of the element so much that it will appear like a circle. Finally, I set the background color property to hashtag 62687F to fill in the color of the circle. I save the file and open index.html in live preview. Great, the ball is rendering correctly. Now to connect the animation to the element. I open styles.css again. In the CSS rule for the ball element, I add the animation property and set its value to bounce2s. This will play the bounce animation over a 2-second duration. I then add the animation direction property and set its value to alternate. This will play the animation in reverse when it completes. And then finally, I add the animation iteration count property and set its value to infinite. This will play the animation loop infinitely. I save the file and open index.html again in live preview. The animation plays, but the speed of the movement is not consistent. The ball moves slowly at the start, then speeds up in the middle and slows down again at the end of the animation. This is because the default timing function is the ease function that animates with this behavior. There are many timing functions available, such as ease, linear, ease in, and ease out. You can read more about this in the additional resources. To match the animation that I built in HTML and JavaScript, I set the animation timing function to linear. I open styles.css again. In the CSS rule for the ball element, I update the animation property and set its value to bounce2s linear. This will play the bounce animation over a 2-second duration using the linear function. I save the file and open index.html again in live preview. Now my animation plays exactly as I intended it to do. In this video, you learned how to create a simple keyframe animation with CSS. But CSS animations and keyframes are quite powerful. Try challenging yourself and see what animations you can build.